Gracious God, may only your word be spoken and your word be heard. Amen. The story that we often refer to as the cleansing of the temple is a critical story in understanding the narrative trajectory of Jesus' life. But fascinatingly, the gospel writers do not all put that story in the same place. For Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the story of Jesus' outburst in the temple around the time of the Passover happens at the beginning of what we think of as Holy Week. For Matthew, the cleansing of the temple happens immediately after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem that we think of as Palm Sunday. For Luke, it seems to happen a little bit later on Sunday afternoon, and for Mark, the cleansing of the temple happens the next day on Holy Monday. But regardless of the nuances of where in Holy Week Matthew, Mark, and Luke place this story, for them, Christ driving the money changers out of the temple was an act of civil and religious disobedience, and it is directly linked to the crucifixion. Jesus made a dramatic and destructive scene in the temple at the time of the Passover, drawing the attention of both Judean and Roman leadership. And from their perspective, to keep the peace, Jesus needed to be stopped. But this morning, we read John's version of this story. And John places the cleansing of the temple at the very beginning of Jesus' public ministry. In John, this story happens just after the wedding at Cana. In John, the cleansing of the temple is the dramatic act that launches Christ's public ministry of teaching and healing and feeding God's people. And by separating the story of the cleansing of the temple from the actions of Holy Week, we have space to reflect on what exactly Jesus was trying to do in this act of public protest. We can see different shades of this story in the way that John tells it. And we can ask, without the reality of the cross looming just around the corner, we can ask, what was the point that Jesus was trying to make? In order to answer that question, we need to say a word about the temple in Jerusalem and what happened there. The temple was the focal point of Jewish religious life. And so the priests spent their days offering sacrifices to God on behalf of the people, all day long, most days, over and over again. Devout Jews from across the region would come to the temple to make offerings, either for atonement of sin or in celebration of life events like the birth of a child. And that is why you needed money changers in the temple complex. You see, the common currency had become the denarius, which was a Roman coin. And the Roman coin was stamped with an image of the emperor and Latin words claiming that the emperor was divine. The coin itself was a violation of the second of the 10 commandments. The coin itself was idolatrous. So you definitely could not use that coin to make a financial donation to the temple or to purchase an animal sacrifice for the temple. And that is where the money changers came in. They were there to take your Roman denarius and change it into a Judean shekel so that you could use it for transactions in the temple. But John's gospel is clear that it was not just the money changers that Jesus was driving out of the temple. It was also the people who were selling cattle, sheep, and doves to be sacrificed. Jesus wanted all of them gone. And where in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus' critique was to say that they had made God's house into a den of thieves, in John, Christ is even more explicit. He accuses them of turning his Father's house into a marketplace. He's not just saying that they are using dishonest sales practices, making them thieves who steal from God's people. He's saying that there should be no business practices there at all. That our religious lives don't need to be supported by a marketplace. Christ is critiquing a capitalistic approach to our faith. And this is a critical and foundational theological point. If what we do in faith communities is about some kind of exchange of goods or money for services, then you are missing that point. God is not a divine automaton into which we put money or prayers or sacrifices and then expect God to just spit blessings back out at us. If that were the case, then we would be the ones in control. And look around. We're clearly not. And we might not articulate that that's how we're understanding our relationship with God. If asked to describe our beliefs, we probably wouldn't say something like, "Oh, I'm exchanging prayers and money for divine favor." But if we're honest, don't we still act like that sometimes? Like there's supposed to be some kind of fair exchange that is happening? And that if that exchange doesn't go down the way that we expect it to, then we blame ourselves for not doing it right. Or we blame others for not doing it right. Or we blame God for not doing it right. The exchange felt unfair because we didn't get what we wanted out of it. And so we start withholding from others and from God as a way to make our displeasure known. But you know what? If we think that our relationship with God is fundamentally transactional, then we will lose in that transaction every time. Because the truth is that God has all the chips. And we can never have anything to offer that would be some kind of equal exchange. In that model of understanding our relationship to God, there is no hope to be found for the journey. Because if that is the game that we think we're playing, the deck is fundamentally stacked against us. No. The only way any of it makes sense is if we remember that there is nothing that is actually ours. Not our house, or our car, or our spouse, or our family. Not our dog, or our garden, or our television, or our vocation. None of it is ours. All of it is God's. And God allows us to be stewards, to be caretakers of those things and those people and that call for our limited time on this earth. It's kind of like when you borrow a friend's car and you are extra careful to make sure that you don't ding it while you're driving. That is the posture that we should take toward everything that we have, because none of it is ours. All of it is God's. And the absolutely wildest part of this whole thing is that God looks at all of the stuff that we think is ours, and God says, you know what? That stuff is mine. But I'm going to let you hold on to 90% of it. I'm just going to ask that you take the other 10%, and out of gratitude for the 90 that I'm letting you steward, I'm going to ask that you give that 10% back to me by sharing it in ways that will help all of my other children in this world. Borrow the 90. Share the 10. That is an approach that makes absolutely no sense in a capitalist economy. But Jesus was in the temple going absolutely bonkers because they turned his Father's house into a marketplace. Because Jesus knows that a capitalistic approach to our faith lives will always fail. That approach, that belief that somehow we can or we should have a fair exchange with God, well, that leads us down a theological rabbit hole that ends with us believing that either we or God have somehow broken the rules. But those are not the rules, because that is not the game that God is playing. There is no fair exchange to be had because we have nothing of equal value to give. There is nothing we could possibly have done to earn the blessings that we have received in our lives. And once we accept that there is no earning those blessings, that there is nothing we can sacrifice to get them, no way to win them, no way to buy them, nothing that we can trade for them. When we finally accept that we cannot earn our blessings, well, we have a word for that, and it's grace. And when we get in touch with that grace in our lives, that sense that we never earned any of it, then we are better equipped to extend grace to others and to never make anyone else feel like they have to earn it either. We are all just caretakers of things and people and a creation that isn't actually ours. And we probably want to return it to God with as few dings as possible. If we could find a way to live our lives with that posture, then it would change everything. It is grace that Christ is pointing to at the beginning of John's story when he demands that God's house not be treated as a marketplace. And it is grace that we find at the end of the story when, after the events of Good Friday, God does not give humanity what we have earned in that moment. God chooses to give us resurrection instead. It doesn't matter if you are at the beginning of the story or at the end. God's grace is present throughout, inviting us to live in the world in a whole new way. Thanks be to God. Amen.